pathological desperation for a boy and a spare to put in the cradle of England. And maybe one side of this is spot on in their assessment, or perhaps the truth is somewhere in between. Either way, this is what we're going to be exploring today. But before we jump into today's topic, I want to say an absolutely massive thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring another video on this channel. Now, I am going to still be working on bits of my site. I want to change some bits up, and no doubt I'm going to be tinkering with it for the foreseeable future, because quite frankly, I'm having fun playing with it. And on top of that, fortunately, as you can see, making website edits is super easy with Squarespace. I am very pleased to say that my website will be going live at 5 p.m. BST today, and I would love it if you would check it out. My merch store is all ready for all of your ritual purposes drinking vessel needs, as you can see here. And I do hope you will like our new logo for Reading the Past, which I have made available as a sticker on my website too. And please do keep those merch suggestions coming. What would you like to see me put on in future? Thanks to Squarespace, we now have a workaround for those times where YouTube chooses to not notify you about my uploads, premieres and lives, because I have now started a mailing list as well. Please do add your email when you visit the website so that I can keep you all up to date. And to build your own website, you can go to squarespace.com for a free trial, and then when you are ready to launch your website, go to squarespace.com/readingthepast to save 10% off of your first purchase of the website or domain. Thanks again to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. But now, let's take a look at the amorous undertakings of King Henry VIII. I think this might be a long one. When we consider the horrendous outcome that romantic entanglements with King Henry VIII caused for some women, I do think it's fair for people to question why every subsequent lady didn't do all that she could to swerve his attentions. Is there anything that could possibly have appealed about him, or was it simply that they were given no choice? Well, power was, and indeed is, seductive. Additionally, in the early decades of his life, Henry was, according to the available evidence, physically appealing. The suit of armour made for the king in around 1515, so when he was 24, tells us that this 6'1" monarch had a 32-inch waist and a 39-inch chest. This athletic shape is still very much in evidence in the armour made for him in 1520, when he was 29 years old. Indeed, in 1515, a Venetian diplomat, Pastaglio, wrote the following, quote, "His Majesty is the handsomest potentate I ever set eyes on, above the usual height, with an extremely fine carved face mouth, his complexion very fair and bright, with auburn hair, combed straight and short in the French fashion, and a round face, so very beautiful that it would become a pretty woman, his throat being rather long and thick. He was born on the 28th of June 1491, so he will enter his 25th year the month after next. He speaks French, English and Latin, and a little Italian. He plays well on the lute and harpsichord, sings from a book at sight, draws the bow with greater strength than any man in England, and jousts marvellously. Believe me, he is in every respect a most accomplished prince, and I, who have now seen all the sovereigns in Christendom, and last of all these two of France and England in such great state, might well rest content, and with sufficient reason to have it said to me, Abi Vieto, sat tuis oculis debe. Go home, traveller, your eyes have seen enough." 4 years later, in 1519, the Venetian ambassador to England wrote of the by then 29-year-old Henry that he was, quote, "extremely handsome. Nature could not have done more for him. He is much handsomer than any other sovereign in Christendom, a great deal handsomer than the King of France, very fair, and his whole frame admirably proportioned." On hearing that Francis I wore a beard, he allowed his own to grow, and as it is reddish, he now has a beard that looks like gold. He is very accomplished, a good musician, composes well, and a most capital horseman, a fine jouster, speaks good French, Latin, and Spanish, is very religious. Hears 3 masses daily when he hunts, and sometimes 5 on other days. He hears the office every day in the Queen's chamber, that is to say, vespers and compline. He is very fond of hunting, and never takes his diversion without tiring 8 or 10 horses, which he causes to be stationed beforehand along the line of country he means to take. And when one is tired, he mounts another, and before he gets home, they are all exhausted. He is extremely fond of tennis, at which game it is the prettiest thing in the world to see him play. His fair skin glowing through a shirt of finest texture. He gambles with the French hostages, to the amount, occasionally it is said, of from 6,000 to 8,000 ducats in a day. He is affable and gracious, harms no one. Handsome, charismatic, athletic, artistic, multi-talented, moral Henry. The very paragon of princes. I mean, he sounds like he would make an ideal husband, doesn't he? And evidently, he was able to put on a good enough show for long enough to impress these foreign visitors in this way. The monstrous, tyrannical Henry would nevertheless be shown with increasing regularity as his reign went on, until that became the largest part of his personality and presentation. The danger that, frankly, any relationship with Henry represented was evidently sufficient to put some people off. Let's remember, in 1538, Christina of Denmark, the beautiful 16-year-old widowed Duchess of Milan, who was approached as a potential 4th wife for King Henry VIII. It is reputed that when she was making her refusal, she said, quote, "If I had 2 heads, one should be at the King of England's disposal." However, as we know, not everyone would prove to be so dissuaded, and if they were, they certainly wouldn't be quite so vocal about it. Whether due to their desire, their fear, or perhaps some personal aspiration, Henry would encounter women who did seem to be willing to form a romantic relationship with him. So now, let's look at a timeline of King Henry VIII's love life to see if by doing that, we can get a clearer idea of that monarch's attitudes to both love and sex. Henry became king in April 1509, which was around 2 months before his 18th birthday. One of his earliest acts was to marry Catherine of Aragon. Henry had first met this woman, his first wife and queen, around 8 years earlier in 1501, when she arrived in England to marry his elder brother Arthur. In fact, Henry had escorted Catherine at this earlier wedding, and he had been so struck by her beauty that he would take time to mention it, to talk of it with his father. At the 1509 wedding, Catherine was 23 years old, a notable beauty who brought to the marriage valuable diplomatic connections with a whole host of powerful players on the European stage. Her time in England after Arthur's death had not been a happy one, and so it is possible that her new husband Henry rather liked the idea that he was in some way her rescuer. He declared himself to be her Sir Loyal Heart. Catherine was, I think, more than willing to play her part, to act as a canvas onto which Henry could map and act out his own Arthurian fantasies. She would happily cheer him at the tournament, celebrate his prowess in war and sport, and pretend not to recognise him when he came disguised to disport himself in her rooms. How deep his affection was for Catherine herself, rather than what she could represent in those performances of romance and chivalry that Henry so enjoyed, is something I question. How much was his affection for her down to how her existence and her proximity was able to help feed Henry's ego? It is rumoured that Henry may have begun to be unfaithful in the early years of this marriage, perhaps with his cousin Anne. She was the daughter of his mother's sister. She was also one of Catherine of Aragon's ladies-in-waiting, the wife of George Hastings, Earl of Huntingdon, and the sister of the Duke of Buckingham. According to the Spanish ambassador Don Luis Caroth, in May 1510, so as Catherine of Aragon's second pregnancy was already underway, a confusing spectacle played out at the court. The ambassador recounts how one of Henry's favourites, William Compton, paid a visit to Anne. Perhaps he was there on his own business, maybe he had been sent by the king. Buckingham witnessed this, took offence, and remonstrated with Compton. Henry then, for his part, took offence and remonstrated with Buckingham. Buckingham left court to sulk. Anne was removed from court by her husband and placed into a convent. The ambassador alleges that Henry, believing that all of this upset stemmed from the reports of Anne's sister, who was another lady-in-waiting to the Queen, decided that he would turn her out of the palace and send her husband with her. If this move was in fact taken, then any banishment or disfavour certainly didn't last long, at least if the husband's career trajectory is anything to go by. There is also evidence to suggest an ongoing connection between Anne and Compton. He would leave her lands in his will, and so perhaps, rather than the king, she was Compton's mistress all along. A letter written at Lille, dated to the 13th of September 1513, so while Henry VIII was busy going to war with France, leaving his Queen Catherine in England as its regent, makes reference to Henry taking a particular shine to one of the ladies at the court of Margaret of Austria. The lady in question is referred to only as Madame the Bastard. Apparently, she kept Henry up dancing all night. Etienne de la Bourne was also serving at Margaret's court during this period. She wrote to Henry on the 17th of August 1514, so a year later. We are told that she sent him, quote, a bird and some roots of great value, thought to be medicinal. In her letter, she reminds Henry that he named her his page at Lille and states, quote, when we parted at Tournai, you told me when I married to let you know, and it should be worth to me 10,000 crowns, or rather angels. As it has now pleased my father, Marie, to have me married, I send this bearer, an old servant of my grandfather, to remind you. So we are left only able to suppose just what might have warranted such a promise on the part of this king. Jane Popincourt was a French-born courtier who had moved to the English court by the late 1490s. She came to serve as a companion and language tutor for Margaret and Mary Tudor. Evidently, though, she had at some point managed to displease the French King Louis in some way, because James was the only name that he had struck from the list of ladies that were being put forward to come to France in attendance of his new wife, who was Henry's little sister, Mary Tudor. Instead, she was left behind to wait on Catherine of Aragon, and some have suggested that Henry took Jane for his lover towards the end of 1514. If he did so, it was a fairly short-lived relationship. Jane would seek and be granted leave to return to France following the death of King Louis. Henry would reward her with £100 for her service and bid her farewell. Elizabeth Bryan, lady-in-waiting to the Queen and sister of Francis Bryan, who became known as the Vicar of Hell, married Nicholas Carew in December 1514. These newlyweds felt the full force of Henry's admiration through the wealth of gifts that they received. Elizabeth was given many precious gems and yards of expensive fabrics, while her new husband Nicholas got his very own private tilt yard at Greenwich. A few months earlier, Elizabeth had been mentioned in a letter that was sent from France by Charles Brandon to the king. The subject was requesting his monarch to effectively go a-wooing on his behalf, or perhaps in his place. At this time, Brandon was directing Henry towards two women, Elizabeth Bryan and Elizabeth Blount. Elizabeth Blount, who is perhaps better known today as Bessie Blount, also served in the household of the Queen. I'm sure you've noticed that there is a clear theme developing here. It is unclear when Bessie's affair with the king first began. Possibly as early as 1514, when she was Henry's partner for the New Year's Revels of that year. More probably in 1518, around the same time as Catherine of Aragon was born from her final pregnancy. Princess Mary had been born a couple of years before this, on the 18th of February 1516. Bessie Brown is the first lady who can be said incontrovertibly to have been Henry's mistress. Their son was born in June 1519. He was named Henry for his father and was given the surname Fitzroy to announce that he was the natural son of the king, Roy or Roy. 3 months after Henry Fitzroy's birth, Elizabeth was married to Gilbert Talboys. This ensured that Elizabeth would be financially secure for the rest of her life. As for their son, and I have made a video on him that I will leave linked, but suffice to say, Henry Fitzroy was honoured in the manner of a king's son. He was, in many ways, a prince without that title, although with a fair few others. In the early 1520s, Agnes Blunt gave birth to her son Richard. He was given the surname of his mother's husband, Edwards. However, it is alleged that he was in fact the natural son of the king. Then Mary Boleyn returned from the French court. She was installed in the household of Queen Catherine of Aragon. She married William Carey on the 4th of February 1520. It is thought that Mary's affair with King Henry began around 2 years later, so at the start of 1522. Mary Boleyn would give birth to 2 children. Catherine was born in around 1523 and Henry in 1526. Both children were given the surname of their mother's husband, who was, of course, possibly their father, Carey. They were never acknowledged as being the king's natural children, although rumours of this being the case do persist through to the present day. It is possible that if Henry had not sought to marry Mary Boleyn's sister Anne, that his affair with her may have had no more evidence to support it having happened than any of the earlier potential questionable liaisons we have discussed so far. But Henry acknowledged this dalliance in 1528, when he was requesting Pope Clement VII to grant him a dispensation so he could marry a woman related to himself in, quote, the first degree of affinity, which the sister of a former mistress would be. Then, in 1535, when he was accused of taking both Mary Boleyn and her mother as his lovers, Henry responded, quote, never with the mother. Henry's interest in and pursuit of his wife's lady-in-waiting Anne Boleyn may have begun as early as 1526. Anne would refuse to become his mistress. Some have viewed this as coquettish gameplay from a woman who, from the very start, had her eye on her mistress's throne. And perhaps this is what she was thinking. Perhaps this is how she planned on things playing out. However, that would represent a frankly audacious thought process. Before Anne, there was simply no precedent for a manoeuvre such as the one that she performed. There was no route mapped out before her. I wonder if it's perhaps more likely that Anne hoped that by ignoring him and denying him, Henry would take the hint and leave her alone. She would leave court for her family home, perhaps thinking that if she were out of Henry's sight, she might become out of mind. Ultimately, though, as an unmarried woman, I think that Anne was in many ways stuck, because until Henry chose to abandon his attempts to woo her, no other man, no other eligible bachelor would be seeking her out to be his bride. So I think her options were as follows. Give in, sleep with Henry, wait for him to become bored and discard her, and then she'd be married off to someone fairly good, but not as good as she might have hoped for if her virtue had remained intact. Or she could wait him out, hope that Henry would tire of her while she remained young enough to marry and have her own family. Or she could gamble, see what happened. Did Anne love him? Did she come to love him? Maybe. Did Henry love her? Or did he simply become transfixed with obtaining something that had been denied to him? Anne may have been leaning into her celibacy, but that doesn't mean that Henry was willing to. Mary Berkeley's son John was born in November 1528, and it was rumoured that Henry VIII was his natural father. Indeed, John was said to have borne a striking resemblance to the king. It was also rumoured that another boy, also born in the 1520s, was this king's natural son. His name was Thomas Stuckley. His mother's name was Jane Pond. Ethelreda Mort, also known as Audrey, was born in the late 1520s or the first half of the 1530s, and it was reputed that she was Henry's natural daughter. Little is known about her mother, who may have been called Joan or perhaps Joanna Bingley. Some have suggested that she was a court laundress, while others think that she might have occupied a higher station in society and at court, that she might have been upper gentry, maybe lower nobility. Not from a particularly prominent family, but certainly a courtier nonetheless. Henry, all the while, continued his pursuit of Anne Boleyn. A powerful, reform-minded faction grew around her. In September 1532, Anne was created Marchioness of Pembroke in her own right. Henry and Anne then travelled to France, presumably hoping to secure Francois' support for their marriage. It is thought that Anne and Henry exchanged vows before witnesses while they were still on the continent, in Calais to be exact, and also that they then began to sleep with each other, probably by the start of 1533. And this would have been potentially 7 years after Henry's pursuit had first begun. As for Anne Boleyn's former mistress, Catherine of Aragon, she had already been banished from Henry's presence back in 1531. And then, on the 23rd of May 1533, almost 24 years after it had first begun, Catherine and Henry's marriage was declared to be null and void. She had, it turned out, and as far as this new ruling was concerned, never truly been married to Henry. His claim to have been her Sir Loyal Heart was, it seems, misplaced, for she was nothing more than the Dowager Princess of Wales, his brother's widow. Henry and Catherine's daughter Mary was left illegitimate. Henry and Anne Boleyn's daughter Elizabeth was born in the September of 1534, or Margaret Shelton. Soon, though, Henry's attentions would turn to another member of Anne's household, Jane Seymour. Anne was pregnant for the last time at the end of 1535. This pregnancy would sadly end in loss on the 29th of January 1536. This was the same day that Catherine of Aragon would be buried as Dowager Princess of Wales at Peterborough Cathedral. 5 days before this, Henry had been seriously injured while at the tilt yard. Some have suggested that this accident caused a personality-changing brain injury in the king. It certainly damaged his leg, or perhaps simply exacerbated an earlier injury. Either way, the king would suffer a chronic leg ulcer for the rest of his life. It would cause him incredible pain and damage his mobility, which may in turn have contributed to his weight gain. This ulcer altered the appearance of Henry's leg, which he had once been very proud of. On top of this, it also smelt unpleasant too. Anne Boleyn was arrested on suspicion of treason on the 2nd of May 1536. She was conveyed to the Tower of London, where she was imprisoned and tried. At the trial of one of her co-accused, her brother George,
I'm trying to write in the chat the name of the YouTube channel that I'm listening to, but it's my first live, so I have no idea how to do it. So I'll just keep working, and then I will add it later.
One of the allegations leveled against Edward was that he and his sister had been heard laughing at Henry for being unable to perform his marital duties. Is this perhaps a sign that Henry had for a long time, or perhaps recently begun, to suffer from erectile dysfunction or impotence? Despite being convicted and sentenced to death, Anne reportedly had hoped that Henry would prove merciful. It is said that she spoke of being released to a life of seclusion in a convent. Henry and Anne's marriage was annulled on the 17th of May 1536, so that's another marriage that never really happened. Another princess made legitimate, downgraded from being the heir of England to simply the Lady Elizabeth, the king's natural daughter. Whatever her hopes, her husband would not prove merciful. Anne was beheaded in the Tower of London on the 19th of May 1536. Her husband Henry was betrothed to her lady-in-waiting Jane Seymour the following day. Henry and Jane were married on the 30th of May 1536. Affable, loyal heart Henry seems to have faded fast, especially if the reports relating to this marriage are to be believed. Because when Jane sought to play out her traditional chivalric role as queen, to intercede with her husband to change his mind, to inspire him to be merciful, she was doing so on behalf of the monasteries and against the backdrop of the Pilgrimage of Grace. It is said that her husband warned her, in no uncertain terms, not to meddle in politics as her predecessor had done, lest her life should end in similar fashion. Jane was pregnant by the start of 1537. Her son Edward was born on the 12th of October 1537. Jane died 12 days later from complications following that birth. When Henry died a decade later, it was beside Jane that he chose to be buried, and this is often taken as a sign that Henry loved her the best. However, if we consider that most kings who have been buried on English soil rest either in Westminster Abbey or in St George's Chapel, Windsor, with Henry preferring the latter for himself. And then add to that that two of Henry's wives were still living at the time of his death. Two of his wives were buried as decapitated traitors with other decapitated traitors beneath the chapel of St Peter and Victor in the Tower, and one was interred at Peterborough, while Jane was already helpfully laid to rest at Windsor. So with this in mind, I would perhaps question how much choice Henry actually had when it came to deciding who to be buried beside. It is the case that Henry grieved Jane as his, quote, true and loving wife. He wrote how, quote, divine providence has mingled my joy with the bitterness of the death of her.
If there are comments, I'm going to reply to them after I finish. So if you want the answer, just wait around. Like watch, I mean.
And he asked if perhaps Francois might arrange for a selection of possible candidates to be brought to Calais so that Henry could meet them.
Yeah, the name of the YouTube channel is Reading the Past. It's really a nice channel. It's like a podcast, a YouTube podcast, video YouTube podcast.
Would you not like, sire, to try them all, one after the other?
I didn't plan to go live today. I've been thinking about it for a while because I have been editing one YouTube video for like 1,000 years, and I gave up, to be honest, because my main work is actually working at the studio and doing this, and I gave it a lot of time and I still didn't come up with the video. So I thought maybe I can just go live. But anyways, today I was organizing a little bit and then decided to just go live as I'm finishing this. It's just a mask that is a wall ornament that should go on the wall. So this is not really a chatty video. I'm just working, and you can just watch me in my studio as if you were with me. And what I usually do. So what I usually do, sometimes I just work without anything. Sometimes with music, sometimes I'm just in the mood to listen to something. So now I'm listening to Reading the Past channel. And yeah, sometimes I just like these historical documentaries. Sometimes I listen to things based on my mood. So sometimes I listen to documentaries. Most of the time, to be honest, I just listen to true crime. And there was a long while that I was addicted to like listening to or watching. I'm not exactly watching, even though it's on YouTube, but just like now, it's just on the background, and I'm just looking at what I'm doing, but listening to what they're saying. So there was a while that I was obsessed with listening to interrogations, like in the police. And another time I would just be obsessed with hearing like a whole trial, not the revised version or the update of the day or of the trial, but actually the 8-hour recording, the break